Welcome back, everybody, to Know It's You, Not Me. I'm your host, Anthony, and today we're jumping into some more scary stories. Now, I know YouTube is just jam-packed full of all these AI-generated stories that are voiced over by AI too. Now, I don't know about you, the stories are good, but that monotone AI voice just doesn't do it for me. So, here we do live readings. All right? All the voices, everything. Right here in front of you. Now, I won't make you look at me the whole time, but I'll peek in from time to time. With all that said, let's get started. The Last Infestation. In the mid 20th century, before satellites mapped every ridge of the Amazon, before highways carved paths through jungle and desert, there was an enemy so small it could hide on the edge of a wound, a parasite with wings, a fly that could turn itself into death. This was no ordinary pest. The screw fly, or as ranchers called it, the screw worm, did not feed on carrion. It sought the living. A mother fly would settle on a scratch, a cut, the moist corner of an eye, and there she would leave her eggs. Tiny, harmless looking, invisible to the untrained eye. Within hours, the larvae hatched, and they began to burrow, not into dead flesh, not into rot, but into muscle that still twitched, into veins still pumping, into eyes that still blinked. The screwfly did not wait for death. It created death from inside of a cut. Ranchers described it as watching an animal being hollowed out alive. They said you could smell it before you saw it. Kind of a sweetness mixed with rot. The smell of living death. To stop the spread, families burned entire herds. To save one cow, they poured kerosene into its wounds, igniting the flesh with chemicals, desperate to kill anything living inside. But if even one larva survived, the whole cycle began again. By the 1960s, entire regions were on the edge of collapse. Ranchers spoke of nights filled with screaming cattle. Doctors pulled larvae from the eyes of children. And governments feared that if the fly spread unchecked, it could devour not just animals, but entire economies, entire nations. They called it the screwworm plague. And in response, humanity built something that had never existed before. A barrier across the continent, a wall. The wall. The screwfly was not a local problem. It was continental. By the 1960s, infestation stretched from the jungles of South America to the cattle ranges of Texas. and the reports were all the same. Animals hollowed out alive, wounds filled with writhing flesh. The plague was spreading, and so humanity built a barrier unlike anything before. The strategy was radical. Millions of male screw flies were bred inside laboratories, each irradiated, each sterilized, each doomed never to sire young. Planes released them in endless clouds. They outnumbered the fertile males, mating with females and leaving eggs that would never hatch. The sterile fly became the bullet, and science became the weapon. To reinforce the line, physical checkpoints were built across narrow corridors of land. This was the wall, where jungle met grassland, where mountains pressed close. Men and women in uniforms inspected every animal. Trucks stopped for spraying. Horses examined wound by wound. And even if one infection was found, the whole herd was destroyed. Burned, buried, erased. Better to lose 100 cattle than let one female escape beyond the line. They called it the wall because it was not a wall of stone or steel. It was a wall of airstrips, laboratories, checkpoints, and sacrifice. It stretched from Panama down through the jungles of Brazil, separating the infested South from the freed North. For decades, it held. By the 1980s, screwworm was eradicated from the United States. By the 90s, Mexico. And by the 2000s, most of South America. Scientists celebrated it as one of the greatest victories in the history of biology. A war fought with insects, against insects, and won. But victories fade. Walls rust. And jungles wait. For decades, the wall held. Planes dropped sterile flies across endless fields. Checkpoints stopped livestock, sprayed chemicals, burned the infected, and slowly, the plague seemed to fade into memory. By the 2000s, screwworm was declared all but eradicated from the Americas. The war was over. The wall forgotten. But in the forgotten jungles near the wall, the people spoke of other things. Carcasses that did not rot. Forests gone unnaturally quiet. Herds that vanished without a trace. At first, these were rumors, whispered, carried by ranch hands, dismissed as paranoia. But soon, the stories grew darker. No, not like before. No the smell, no the mess. We found the deer, empty, dry inside. Like it was scooped clean. No worms, no blood, just uh, t- clay. I told the inspectors. They laughed, said screwworms were history. But I know. I know 'twas them. But I know. I know 'twas them. The bodies no longer stank of rot. They were hollow, clean. Something new had arrived. In 2012, patrol logs from the old checkpoints described husks discovered in the jungle. Patrolmen noted deer, cattle, and even wild pigs collapsed and emptied. Some swore they saw them twitch, even after death. One officer wrote of a hollow carcass moving. Inspection teams went out. Some never returned. The ones who did came back pale, silent, refusing to speak of what they saw. Official reports dismissed the losses as accidents, jungle heat, disease, or bandits. But the whispers spread. The flies had changed. Where the screwfly once brought screams and stench, the new strain brought silence. Scavengers would not approach the bodies. Vultures circled but never landed. Predators avoided entire clearings. It was as if the jungle itself had learned to fear. These were not the screwflies of history. This was something else. Something that had outgrown the wall. What emerged from the husks was not the same insect humanity once defeated. These flies no longer dropped off their host to bury themselves in the soil. They stayed inside, feasting, swelling, growing, until their host collapsed into empty shells. When the swarm finally broke free, they were larger than ever before. Some nearly the size of carpenter bees, wings shimmering black and oily, bodies thicker, stronger. Their drone no longer the background buzz of summer, but a sound you could feel in your chest, a living vibration. In the old cycle, larvae lasted only days. Now they lingered for weeks. They didn't just feed on muscle and blood. They threaded themselves throughout the nervous system. They pulsed against the brain. Some hosts walked for days after infection, alive but emptying out. Their bodies nothing more than vessels for the next swarm. To eat, they occupied. One fly saw, and all flies saw. One fly moved, and all moved. They emerged not as individuals, but as a swarm, a mind divided into thousands of bodies, a hive. Farmers spoke of swarms that moved in patterns, circles, spirals, waves across the sky. At first, mistaken for tricks of the wind, until they turned together towards a living target. They weren't random. They waited. I saw them clinging to the barn roof, all of them facing the same way, like soldiers on parade. And then they dropped all at once. The cattle didn't even scream. By the time I reached the door, it was too late. They didn't scatter. They didn't fly off. They moved together like one shadow. They had learned patience. They had learned coordination. The parasite had become a predator. The old screwworms brought screams and stench. The new flies brought silence. Forests emptied. Fields lay still. Life fled before them. Only the hive remained. The first observers described it as unnatural. A swarm that did not scatter. A swarm that did not drift in chaos, but moved as one. One sees, all see. One learns, all learn. It was as though thousands of wings carried a single thought. Farmers began reporting swarms that hunted in formation. They circle herds in tight spirals, driving animals into panic, separating the weak from the strong. Some swarms blocked escape routes, herding their prey into ravines. They were not just parasites anymore. And then came the hum. Ranchers called it Canto de Muerte, the death song. A low, thrumming vibration that rolled over the fields like thunder. Animals froze, staggered, collapsed in terror before the swarm even touched them. Some humans reported disorientation, nausea, even hallucinations when exposed to the sound. They didn't just fly. They watched. They circled the house, tapping on the windows with their bodies, over and over, like they were asking to come in. My brother went outside with a torch. He said he'd scare them off. He never came back inside. By morning, the only thing left of him was his boots. The flies had learned so much patience. They had learned tactics. They had learned us. And with forest creatures and cattle spread quickly. Deer, pigs, dogs, stray animals, then scavengers. Vultures circling the skies vanished. Foxes disappeared. And when the forests and fields grew empty, the flies turned to us. First, it was hunters, gone overnight. Then, ranch hands. Then, entire families. Their homes left intact. Food still on the tables. Doors unlocked. Only silence inside. And sometimes, husks in the field. We came back in the morning. They were gone. Everyone. My uncle, his wife, his children. No blood, no struggle, just gone. But the buzzing was everywhere. The husks were not waste. They were weapons, left behind, half empty, but alive enough to move. Some patrols reported husks that twitched, staggered forward before bursting open with flies. Others swore they saw them, used as bait. They no longer hunted only at night. By day, they clustered in great clouds, blotting out the sun. They perched on rooftops, on telephone poles, on the walls of houses, and always they faced the same direction, watching. By the time governments responded, the damage was done. Patrols sent into the Old Wall region never returned. Checkpoints went dark. Military units deployed to contain outbreaks simply vanished. Entire provinces became silent zones on the map, marked in red, then black, then erased. The wall had not failed. The wall had been outgrown. As villages emptied and the swarm spread, one question remained. What changed them? For half a century, the wall had held. The screwworm was beaten. But then, almost overnight, the enemy returned. Larger, hungrier, and coordinated. Scientists, governments, and conspiracists all offered answers. None were comforting. Some blamed the changing climate, longer rainy seasons, hotter nights, soil temperatures that warped the flies' life cycles, extending their larval stage and pushing them into new behaviors. In this version, nature itself had rewritten the rules. Others turned on the very weapons that once saved us. The sterile release program. Billions of irradiated flies released year after year. A pressure cooker of evolution. What if the flies adapted? What if sterile release forced them into a form no scientists anticipated? Whispers grew of something darker. That the wall was never only about protection, but testing. That deep in jungle labs, screw flies were modified, engineered, and released. And when the projects were abandoned, something remained. Something that learned. And then, the oldest theory of all, that the flies were never gone. That beneath the soil, they waited, evolving in silence. Not a mutation, not an accident, but an awakening. Whichever theory you choose, one fact remains. The wall held for 50 years. But when the swarm came back, it came back changed. In the silence of abandoned checkpoints, in the jungles where husks still lie, one question remains unanswered. Was it nature? Or was it us? The flies were no longer parasites. They were not scavengers, they were builders. From the husks of animals, from the bodies of men and women, they constructed towers of clay. Structures that hummed at frequencies no one could explain. At night, the spires glowed faintly, as if alive. Some said they were nests. Others believed they were antennae. But when military units destroyed them, more swarms came. Bigger, stronger, and furious. And they rebuilt the towers within days, as if defending not a home, but a signal. By 2015, entire regions were abandoned. Red zones became black zones. Quarantine lines became borders. Governments stopped sending patrols. The wall had been replaced by silence, and still the towers multiplied. They're not just flies. They're not just animals. They're building. I can hear it. Under my feet. It's inside the ground. They're not finished. God help us. They're not finished. The last infestation is not a plague. It is not a swarm. It is a construction. And the real question is not how we stop them, but what they are building from us. Hello. And if you made it all the way through this story, I appreciate you. If you enjoyed it, please make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you know when I put out some new content. And for the record, the screw worm is real. The wall, the invisible wall, is real. A lot of this story I made up, but a lot of the underlying facts are real. And they do eat meat, and they do breed in wounds, and they are still out there. And actually, there was one case in the US this year. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks for watching.